Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. 40 years ago, Britain and Argentina fought a bitter war over a few small and remote islands in the Atlantic Ocean. The Falkland Islands remain a controversial issue today. Where are the Falkland Islands? Why did Argentina and Britain go to war over them? And who should control the islands? Let's discuss these questions on today's episode of Thinking in English. You can find the full transcript on thinkinginenglish.blog. Head over to my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast over there, and leave a like and a follow wherever you're listening right now. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Remote, remote. Far away in distance, as in, he lives in a remote mountain village. Sparsely, sparsely. With only a small number or amount of people or things. For example, his room is sparsely furnished. He only has a bed. To renounce. To renounce. To say formally or publicly that you no longer own, support, believe in, or have a connection with something. As in, Gandhi renounced the use of violence. Sovereignty. Sovereignty. The power of a country to control its own government. For example, talks are ongoing over the sovereignty of a disputed island. To occupy. To occupy. To move into and take control and or possession of a place. For instance, troops quickly occupied the city. To surrender. To surrender. To stop fighting and admit defeat. As in, they would rather die than surrender. To inherit. To inherit. If you inherit a situation, problem, department, etc., you become responsible for dealing with it or managing it. As in, when I took the job of manager, I inherited a lot of financial problems. Undisputed. Undisputed. If something is undisputed, everyone agrees about it. For example, he is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Self-determination. Self-determination. The ability or power to make decisions for yourself, especially the power of a nation to decide how it will be governed. For example, the UN considers self-determination to be a human right. "40 years ago, on April 2nd, 1982, Argentina invaded a remote British colony known as the Falkland Islands. A short but bitter war quickly followed, which made headlines around the world and left hundreds dead. 40 years on, the Falkland Islands remain a highly controversial part of the world, particularly in Argentina, who maintains the island should be part of the South American country. What and where are the Falkland Islands? Why was there a war over such a remote territory? And who should control these islands? By the end of this episode, you should all have a clearer idea about these issues. And importantly, I need to make it clear that although I'm British, I will always try to approach issues neutrally and think critically when discussing something controversial. I know I have Argentinian listeners, and If I say something you disagree with or think is incorrect, that is absolutely fine. Reach out to me and let me know why. Leave a comment on the blog or message me on Instagram. Just please don't get angry with me. I always ask my listeners to keep an open mind, and that is true even about an issue you think you already know about. So let's get started with an introduction to the Falkland Islands. Where are they? Well, the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas in Argentina, are a small, isolated, and sparsely populated British overseas territory located in the southwest Atlantic Ocean, about 8,000 miles away from Britain. There are two main islands to the territory, East and West Falkland, and hundreds of smaller islands. The Falkland Islands are a British overseas territory, as I just said. There are currently 14 British overseas territories, ranging from Gibraltar in Europe to Pitcairn Islands in the Pacific. And I made an episode on Pitcairn, so you should go and listen to that as well. And Anguilla in the Caribbean. All of the overseas territories have some kind of connection to Britain's history, empire, and culture, although each place is certainly different and unique. Most overseas territories, including the Falkland Islands, are self-governing, meaning that they have their own governments, laws, and councils to make decisions relevant to the territory. However, Britain tends to be responsible for the defense and international relations of such countries, or such territories, I should say. The government of the Falkland Islands is also responsible for other British territories, including South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. And so remember these two names because they're mentioned again later. As of 2012, the Falkland Islands have a population of just 2,840 people. The population is almost entirely of British descent and are all English speaking. The main industry on the island is sheep farming. Wool and some meat are sold to Great Britain every year. Tourism has also become a major industry in recent years, and there are current attempts to extract oil from under the islands. The Falklands are not the easiest place to live. The wind averages over 30 kilometers per hour. Temperatures rarely get higher than 7 or 8 degrees. There are no natural trees, but a great variety of birds and sea animals can be found around the Falkland Islands. The islands were first landed on by a British, or I guess English sailor called John Strong in the year 1690, and he named the islands after a British naval official called Viscount Falkland. Years later, the French were the first country to found a settlement on the islands. Britain founded their first settlement on the islands just after the French, a few months later. But Britain was forced to leave by the Spanish in 1770. Britain returned to the island in 1771 after threatening a war with Spain, but then left the island again a few years later due to economic problems. Importantly, when Britain left in the 1770s, they never renounced their claim to the island. Argentina became an independent country in 1816 and soon declared that they now owned the Falklands. Remember, however, that Britain never renounced their claim. So there were now competing claims to who owned the islands. The USA destroyed Argentina's main settlement in 1831 after the community arrested some American fishing boats. In 1833, Britain retook control of the islands and forced the few remaining Argentinian officials to leave. And by the end of the 19th century, a British community of 1,800 people was living independently on the territory. At the same time, Argentina continued regularly protesting and complaining against the British settlement. After World War II, The United Nations also started to consider the issue of the Falkland Islands' sovereignty. In 1965, the UN General Assembly asked Britain and Argentina to find a peaceful solution to the issue. Discussions were regularly held until 1982, when Argentina decided to invade the islands. So, in April 1982, Argentinian President Leopoldo Galtieri decided to invade and take control of the islands by military force. Argentina had already established a settlement on the South Sandwich Islands in 1976. This was not authorized by the UK, but was unopposed at the time. In 1982, they then decided to fully occupy the Falkland Islands and South Georgia as well. An Argentinian military force was sent to the islands. The British governor was sent back to the UK, along with a small group of soldiers who surrendered to the much larger Argentinian forces. Some of the Falkland Islanders were actually deported off the island by the Argentinians, while others were arrested and spent weeks under Argentinian control. In response, the British Prime Minister authorized a full military operation involving all branches of the British Armed Forces for the first time since World War II. 127 warships, submarines, and merchant ships taken over by the British government set off to reclaim the Falkland Islands. After retaking South Georgia on April 25th, the British military established an exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands. No ships or aircraft were allowed in or out of the zone. Argentinian forces were attacked and their ships sunk, including the ARA General Belgrano, which sank with a loss of over 300 Argentinians. Argentina responded by attacking British ships. In total, 7 British ships were sunk and many others seriously damaged. Despite Argentinian attacks on ships, 4,000 British soldiers landed on the eastern island in May. Although Argentina had significantly more soldiers than the UK, Argentina's soldiers were mainly conscripts with less experience than the professional British army. British troops were forced to march 56 miles across East Falkland while avoiding mines, enduring terrible weather, and attacking largely at night due to the lack of cover on the island. Remember, there are no trees on the Falkland Islands. Fierce battles took place between the British and Argentine forces. After more fighting in the mountains behind the island's capital, Port Stanley, Argentina's soldiers surrendered on June 14th. 11,000 Argentine soldiers had their weapons confiscated and were sent back to Argentina. The islanders enthusiastically celebrated the return of the British, and the task force then retook control of the South Sandwich Islands. In total, 907 people died during the conflict, 649 Argentinians, 255 British soldiers, and 3 Falkland Islanders. After the war, the restrictions introduced by Argentina were removed, and Britain established stronger control. A larger contingent of soldiers and warships are now permanently stationed in the region. Britain and Argentina did re-establish diplomatic relations in the 1990s, but the issue of the Falkland Islands is still controversial and disputed in the South American country. In 2009, the Falkland Islands introduced a new constitution. The island's government is now significantly stronger, and the islanders have the right to decide for themselves the political status of the territory. In March 2013, a referendum was held on the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. Basically, the islanders were asked whether they wanted to stay as an overseas territory of the UK, or end their relationship with the UK. 92% of islanders voted, with 99.8% voting to stay British. Only 3 people didn't vote yes. And in fact, they didn't vote no either. Their votes were blank or incorrectly filled in. So I'm sure as you've listened to this episode, you've been questioning who should be in control of the islands. Should it be the UK, who currently controls the Falklands, or Argentina, who constantly complain that they want to control the islands? Or should they be independent? I don't know. I think a good way to think about these issues is by looking at Britain and Argentina's reasons for saying the Falkland Islands should be their territory. Let's start from Argentina. From the Argentinian perspectives, the Falkland Islands are Argentinian because they inherited them from Spain when they became an independent country. During discussions with the UN, Argentina has cited a 1493 declaration by the Pope, which divided newly discovered territories between Portugal and Spain. Argentina argues that the Falklands were in the Spanish area, and thus are now Argentinian. However, at the time, the Falkland Islands had not been discovered, and Spain was actually only the third country to establish a settlement on the island, behind the French and British. While Spain bought the French settlement, so bought their claim, Britain never renounced their claims. Argentina also argues that because Britain never protested the Spanish occupation in the 18th century, they had in effect dropped their claims at the time. The islands were officially claimed by Argentina in 1820, and Argentina controlled the territory until 1833. The South American country also bases their claim on the location of the Falkland Islands. They are close to Argentina and on the same continental shelf. So, in summary, Argentina's claims to the Falklands are based on history, geography, and an inheritance from Spain. On the other hand, the UK also claims the Falkland Islands, often for similar reasons. While Argentina consistently references the fact that they controlled the islands until 1833, the UK actually claimed and settled the Falklands long before Argentina was a country. When the UK left the island in 1774 due to economic conditions, they actually left documents on the island explaining that it was still a British territory, still part of the British Empire. Argentina could not have inherited the islands from Spain because Spain was not necessarily in control of the islands when Argentina became independent. From 1811 onwards, Spain was not present on the Malvinas, as they were called, or the Falklands. So, how could Argentina inherit something that Spain didn't have? The islands have been continuously and peacefully occupied by Britain since 1833, which also gives justification for British sovereignty. While Argentina claims that the current population of the island should not be able to choose for themselves the political situation of the Falklands, because the Argentinian settlement in 1833 was illegally taken over, and the Argentinians were forced back to Argentina. However, while soldiers were sent back, civilians and regular people were asked and even encouraged to stay on the island. They were not forced to leave. In my opinion, the strongest claim comes from the people of the islands. The principle of self-determination states that people should be able to make their own decisions. Considering that 99.8% of the island voted to stay British 10 years ago, I think it is very clear they support Britain's claim. They have lived on the island for nearly 200 years, speak English, and are British citizens. And if they want to stay British citizens, the UK argues that they should be allowed to. So, what do you think? After hearing the history and current situation of the Falkland Islands, as well as the arguments by each country who should control the islands. Personally, I think we should respect what the islanders want. If they want to stay British, then the islands should stay British. If they want to become independent or Argentine, then they should be allowed to change and become Argentinian. Importantly, Britain and Argentina are not the only countries with territorial disputes. The chances are that your country has, or in the past had, an argument with another country about land. Disputes over Crimea and the Donbass region in Ukraine have now contributed to a war after the invasion by Russia. China has disputes with almost every country it's close to, especially over islands in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, as well as in Tibet and in Xinjiang. India and Pakistan, Israel Palestine, Western Sahara in Africa, Transnistria in Eastern Europe, Japan and Russia, Taiwan, Somaliland and Somalia, Antarctica, Britain's other overseas territories, especially Gibraltar and Spain. There are disputes over land everywhere. Often the wishes of the normal people who live in disputed lands are ignored by the powerful central governments who don't want to look weak. But we should remember that there are often real people who have lived in disputed areas for years, and their wishes need to be respected. So, what do you think? Who should control the Falkland Islands? Let me know in the comments on Spotify. Reach out on the blog or send me a message on Instagram. While you're there, follow me on Instagram, follow on Spotify, like on Spotify, give a rating on Apple and write a review. And check out thinkinginenglish.blog. You can donate on the blog if you'd like to donate to Thinking in English. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, if you've got any comments, just message me. But please be nice. I don't like angry messages. And I hope you all have a great week. Thank you for listening.